I don't know about you, but at the initial reading of this passage, confusion comes to my mind on different things. Let me just give an example. In light of what is said in this passage, is it okay to plan things or not? If I plan, is that being arrogant? I encountered some of this a couple years ago when I was doing some training with some others of Hungarian pastors. And part of the training was we were about to teach them about planning and goal setting and some of that side of things. And there was actually a response back, from them, doesn't that mean if we start doing that, we're not being dependent upon the Spirit of God in our work and what we're doing? And then others were saying, even like this passage in James, isn't that discouraging planning? And so, were we wrong to encourage them to set goals and make plans? And then there's the whole issue of prayer here. And I'm not sure how it fits together. When I pray, do I need to say, if it is the Lord's will? But if I use that phrase, if it is the Lord's will, am I doubting? We read as we looked a number of weeks ago at James chapter 1, verse 5, it says, if any of you lack wisdom, ask of God, and he will grant it. But if we are, and then it goes on and says in that passage, we are to believe and not doubt is one of the challenges there. And then if you go to James 5:15, it's using the phrase, the prayer offered in faith will make a sick person well. And so if I'm saying, if it is the Lord's will, am I offering a prayer in doubt? What is James getting at in this passage? If I were to summarize what I sense the emphasis of this passage is, I'd summarize it in this phrase. James is seeking to confront the arrogant self-sufficiency that many of us express as we navigate the map of life. Look specifically at verse 13 on the screen there. Notice the well-laid plan. 1, go to this or that city. 2, spend a year there. 3, carry on business. And 4, make money. And then the starting time is arranged too, isn't it? Today or tomorrow? But if you look at the overall context of what is being said there, the people making these plans have given no place for God in their plans. It is this arrogant self-sufficiency that James is rebuking. He's rebuking the kind of heart that lives and makes its plans apart from a constant awareness of the hand of God. And so, in one sense, I can say in regards to planning, James does not discourage us from planning or doing, only planning or doing apart from the reliance on God. Now, Sam, you almost led into some of what I was doing. Let me ask this question. He talked about smartphones as you entered in this morning. How many of you have ever used Google Maps or some other app to help you get from one location to another in the city? Probably most of us have. Yeah, I can see it. Almost everyone's doing that. Now, let me go a step further with that. For a route that you already know how to drive, maybe it's your route to work or some other place, how many of you have actually used that to help you on a route that you already know to get from one place to another? Probably most of us. Now, why is that? Why do we do it on a route that we already know? Well, maybe there's an accident, maybe there's construction taking place, or something else has happened that you can't take that route. Sometimes there's actually a route that you hadn't thought of before, and you've always driven that route, and you use this, and it shows up a route that you hadn't thought about before. Or sometimes you're going to a place that you haven't been to before, and instead of trying to, okay, what is that street sign? Am I at that street yet? And squinting, you can simply have your phone say, as it often does, okay, in 200 meters, turn right, or stay in the center lane, or, and it guides you each step as you're going along. So my question to get us thinking about, why is it that we so heavily and frequently rely on our smartphones to navigate the streets of Toronto and around, but rely so little on God as we navigate the map of life? What would it be like if we checked in with God even more frequently than we do when we're driving the streets of Toronto and having this thing check in on us? Most people scurry around busily trying to accomplish things through their own strength and ability. Some succeed enormously. Others fail miserably. But both groups miss what life is meant to be, living and working in close collaboration with God. When we depend on God continually, even more than we do our smartphones, we see miracles happen all around. And it changes our perspective. We see miracles while others see natural occurrences or coincidences. We begin each day with joyful expectation, watching to see what God will do. And life becomes a glorious adventure. We accept our weaknesses as a gift from God, knowing that as we rely on Him, His power is made perfect in our weakness. We keep our plans tentative, knowing that His plans are far superior. And we consciously live and move or have our being in Him, desiring that Jesus truly live in us. Jesus in us, us in Him. This is the intimate adventure He offers us. You know, when I think of another verse that summarizes this, probably one of my favorite passages in Scripture, it is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 that says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight." You know, when it says that phrase, acknowledge Him, you know, I picture that as like the checking in, just as we do on our smartphone, checking in all our ways. God, what's the direction I need to make here? What's your perspective? And lean not on your own understanding. Isn't that what James is getting at in the next verse there? He says, why? You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while, then vanishes. James is rebuking our underestimation of our own limitations. We do not even know what will happen tomorrow. You know, before we get cocky and confident, feeling like nothing can stop us from conquering the world, James is trying to say, in the vast scheme of this whole universe, what's he saying there? You are a mist that appears for a little while, then vanishes. There's frailty in our life. We are limited. You know, it was Charles Spurgeon who made this comment, thinking about particularly the frailty of life. There are 1,000 gates to death, and though some seem to be narrow wickets, many souls have passed through them. Men have been choked by a grape seed, killed by a tile falling from a roof of a house, poisoned by a drop, carried off by a whiff of foul air. I know not what there is that is too little to slay the greatest king. It is a marvel that man lives at all. Life is a miracle. It is a gift, but we just think we're unstoppable and nothing can stop us, and we depend on ourselves. And James is getting at here, we underestimate our own limitations and the frailty of life. But when we come to recognize that and begin to rely on God, we begin to say, God knows I don't. God's in control. I'm not. I had a friend of mine who used this illustration, and I liked it. She was describing how I view life like going on a mountain road. And as you go on a mountain road, you can't see very far ahead. We don't know whether there's going to be a Y in the road, and then how do we decide which road to take? And relying on Him is like saying, God, you're above the mountains. You're above the clouds. You can look down on this situation. You know what ahead, and you're the one that can guide me in these things. I am so limited in my perspective. And so let me clarify in the midst of this, in this whole issue, that setting goals and planning is a normal practice approved of in Scriptures. You know, Proverbs 20:18, you know, we learn that make plans by seeking advice. If you wage war, obtain guidance. And in Luke 14, Jesus actually uses the illustration of a builder who did not plan before building a tower, and of a king who did not prepare properly for battle as examples of people poorly committed to their tasks, and rebuking them for that. And so I don't believe we were leading the Hungarian pastors to arrogance when we were encouraging them to make plans. And neither are you if you're including God in your plans. You know, when I just think about who's here this morning, there are so many different issues before us right now. Some of you are going back to school. You've been out for the summer. As you anticipate what's ahead, are you moving that, relying on God and making your plans that way? Some going to university. You know, others are asking questions about career. God, where are you leading me? And making decisions there. And some finding the right person who will be your spouse. And, you know, I've told some of you that, you know, I thought when I reached that place where I knew my career and knew who I was marrying, that the major decisions were behind me. And yet, any of us who are older than that realize there's still more decisions. Then you have questions like, you know, with kids and when and how many and how do I raise them, and living situations and career changes, and then financial situations change and how do I do those, and health concerns get in, and aging parents, and the list goes on and on and on and on. As we navigate life, there are many issues. Are we seeking to continue to rely on ourselves, Jesus is saying, and depending there, or are we living and walking in dependence on God? And I would say more so than we do our smartphones. The challenge that James is saying, stop planning as if you know exactly what the future holds, or as if you control the future. Instead, what are we being challenged as the passage goes on? We ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Now, some of you may say, okay, every time I make a statement about the future, do I need to actually say this? You know, I hope to go to, you know, whatever, and say, oh, if it's the Lord's will. Is this a mechanical phrase that we need to say after every sentence that we make? Well, if you look at Paul, there's times when he said that, Acts 18:21, saying, I will come back if it is God's will, or, you know, but if I come to you very soon, if the Lord is willing. Or I hope to spend some time with you if the Lord permits. But there's other times in Scriptures where Paul is talking about future plans, and he doesn't use that. So it's not a mechanical phrase in that way. Yet it is obvious that whether Paul explicitly stated it or not, he always conditioned his plans on the will of God. And the challenge for us, for you and for me, do you do the same as you navigate the map of life? You know, I have been confronted with the frailty of life and holding plans lightly this past week, as Samuel referred into his comment and in his prayer, as my grandson, who's now about 12 days old, lies in critical care in the neonatal unit in Connecticut. You know, as where I was on Monday, we were just getting more and more negative news. They were still trying to sort through what is wrong. And, you know, if you haven't heard, some of the things are that they were finding his blood was all out of whack. He's got 3 holes in his heart. He can't breathe on his own. He needs the assistance of oxygen. He can't feed on his own right now. And they were still trying to figure things out. And so, you know, on Monday, I'm just feeling I need to take some time to fast and to pray and just pray for this whole situation. You know, and then here, as I'm seeing all that is happening to my grandson, I'm beginning to rest, and then what's happening to my daughter, so Stephanie and his parents, and the stress that they're under and the exhaustion that they're experiencing. I'm just going, Lord, I don't even know what your will is. Is your will to take him, or is the will to heal him in some way and bring him to life? Now, I've been involved in prayer meetings. As you know, we have prayer meetings that last an hour and a half on Wednesday nights. So praying for a while is not the issue. But I don't often pray for one issue for over an hour and saying, God, how do I pray this? And then I'm just going, I don't even know what God's will is in this situation. How do I pray? And if you draw some parallel to the passage, and you'll see as I explain some of my journey this week, that's part of it. Even our praying is often making plans and how we do this and our attitude in that. So here I am, I'm wrestling through, how do I pray for my son? And so I don't know what God's will, so I can say, what can I pray confidently? And so I begin by praying, God, I pray that your presence would be incredibly real in that hospital room. And just thinking, here's a boy who's over a week old, and his mom has yet to hold him because no one's been able to hold him, all the wires and everything, and it's too fragile going into his body. And so I was praying, Jesus, you reach down and you hold his hand and let him know your touch in this time. And may your presence and peace be felt by Stephanie and Dave and the doctors, and give them wisdom as they're working through the issues. And then I begin to, sometimes I find when I'm praying over something for a longer period of time, sometimes I find putting my prayers to song helps. And so it was just on Sunday we had sung Waymaker, and so I began to take some of the words and change them to become an expression of my prayer. And I'm not a singer, forgive me, but so what I started doing was thinking about him in that room. I said, you are there working in that room. I worship you. I worship you. And I could say that, the God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I could worship him and saying, God, you are there working in that room. I worship you. You are working. But then I'm going, how do I pray next? And I felt like I could then say, for greater glory to your name, oh, so move, oh, so move. Because I don't know what God's will is in this situation. But I could say, what I want. I want God, the greatest glory to your name, to come in this situation. And so you move in this situation for what is greater glory to your name. And I admit that at times when I was praying and I was picturing God holding his hand, I was like saying, Jesus, come, take Joshua's hand and just bring him home with you, with all the suffering that he's going through. And then as it was getting worse in the week, as they were trying to do blood transfusion things to him and they weren't taking, and then as they were trying to solve his blood issues, it was just even more so. It was getting discouraging, and I found myself, honestly, I was praying, God, just take him. It's far easier than what's happening. So we get this text from my daughter on Thursday afternoon basically saying there's a critical operation they've been trying to do. It's called a PICC. I'm learning lots of medical things this week. A PICC is where you put a line into the arm and it goes up to almost the heart, because they've been trying to do things to give him the intravenous that he needs. And it's not working. His veins are too small, and they tried to put the PICC line in a number of times, and it wasn't working. And so we're going, if this not succeeds, right now, in order to do it, they were using the umbilical cord, but that, now after giving birth, that actually dries up and stops working after 2 weeks. And so if this PICC line doesn't work, he has no means to get the nutrients and medicine he needs. And so I'm praying, God, oh, so move for greatest glory to your name. And so it was interesting. I got a text at noon on Friday where it said the PICC line went in and it was successful. And I found something switch in my heart at that point. At this point, I've been saying, God, for greater glory to your name, oh, so move. And yet, what did I find? At that point, I'm going, okay, God, you've given me some glimmer of hope that for greater glory to your name, at least you're choosing to have him live a little bit longer now. And now I'm finding myself, and there has been a switch, and all of a sudden the crisis to try and keep this young, now 12-day-old boy alive is over, and Stephanie was actually able to hold her child for the first time in almost 2 weeks. Things are changing, and we've seen it, and I sense that. So, even whether we're making plans as we talk about all these other things, or whether I'm even praying and I'm making plans, the emphasis of the scripture is, Lord, if it be your will, or what is greater glory to your name, and holding our plans loosely. Because part of the struggle is when we hold our plans tightly and God doesn't come through on our term, often that's when resentment comes in our hearts. But it's as we're holding things loosely and saying, God, your will be done, in our plans or in our prayers and these things, that then when God moves, and we can be open to that and give praise to him in the midst of how he's working. So that's some of my journey as I've been wrestling through some of this issues with Joshua and his young life and what is happening there. as I look, we need to come to that place of saying, God knows I don't. God is in control, I'm not. And navigate life. And for me this week, it's been supporting my family in the midst of this. But each of you have issues that you're going and decisions, and you have this week, many of you going back to school, work situations. Are you walking in dependence upon God and saying, God, oh, so move what brings greatest glory to your name, and not holding your plans so tightly? And that you're relying on God and checking in on Him more frequently than you do this, even as you're trying to navigate someplace in this city. The passage ends with, if you look at verse 18, quite a verse I've just read on its own. It says, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and does not do it, it is sin for them. Just taken on its own, that's quite a powerful statement. You know, what is James getting at there? In many ways, he's saying, now that I have pointed the matter out to you, you have no excuse. But we need to refer to this in the context. James is confronting our self-reliance, our lack of really saying, God, even regularly in this day, God, guide me. Give me wisdom in these decisions I face. May I be walking. Some of you as teachers I see having to go back this week. Help me as I head back to the classroom. As we drive to work, traffic's going to be crazier this week as people go back. God help me in it as I drive. And this becomes regular, checking in with Him more so than our phones. That's what God desires, us walking in obedience and reliance on Him and in dependence upon Him. And now that we know these things, we need to do it. Frank, if you could come, I just want us just to take a moment. As it says, he who knows the good they ought to do. Maybe God's been just stirring your heart in some way of something that you've been depending upon yourself. To use James' words of just that's like an arrogant boasting of yourself. Maybe there's some place you've been doing that. I invite you, just as we just be quiet, just say, God, forgive me for my self-reliance. May I depend upon you. Or maybe it's just giving in this moment, just as Frank plays, just giving that issue to God and saying, God, guide me. Or maybe saying, God, I've been walking totally independent upon you. Lead me as I begin to explore what does it mean to fully depend upon you. Let's just take a moment, just be quiet, and just pray for a moment.